In 1936, the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce stated during a trance that the Earth would undergo a major shift and the Earth's axis would tilt between 16 to 20 degrees. When Mount Etna in Italy and volcano Pelée in the Caribbean erupt simultaneously, we will have 90 days to evacuate from coastal areas. What exactly does this prophecy mean? Mainly, both Mount Etna and volcano Pelée are famous active volcanoes. In fact, Mount Etna had just erupted once in May 2023. From another perspective, these two volcanoes are located at opposite ends of the Earth's volcanic and seismic belt, like a giant seesaw. Moreover, with the eruption of the Tonga volcano, positioned in the center of this seesaw, in 2022, experts have grown increasingly suspicious that this seesaw may indeed be connected to the Earth's axial tilt. So, what would the Earth look like if its axis really tilted 20 degrees? At that time, Europe would experience tremendous changes, Japan could be submerged, and the Himalayas might become a gigantic ship. Throughout his life, Edgar Cayce left behind 14,306 prophecies, including 4 particularly terrifying ones. The first is the tilting of the Earth's axis, which may have already started happening. The second concerns an ancient lost civilization and the truth about humanity in Atlantis. The third involves the collective subconscious of all humankind, stored in the Akashic Records. The fourth relates to astrology, the world after death, the soul, the astral body, and other legendary figures such as Nikola Tesla and Dolores Cannon. Edgar Cayce lived a life as if he were born to shine. To ignore the wonders surrounding him would truly be a great loss. Today, let us explore the path of dream reading, hypnosis, and interpretation taken by Edgar Cayce, along with the most significant prophecies he ever made. The legendary journey of the sleeping prophet begins here. Edgar Cayce was born in 1877 into a farming family in the rural town of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, USA. He was one of 5 siblings, all of whom were devout Christians. As a child, Cayce was somewhat slow-witted, but when he turned 13, something extraordinary happened. One day in class, he was so absent-minded that he repeatedly misspelled a simple English word. The teacher kept him after class and sternly discussed his academic issues with his parents. That evening, Cayce's father tutored him late into the night. Exhausted, Cayce asked for a 5-minute break, and his father agreed. When his father returned 5 minutes later, he found that Cayce could suddenly answer all the questions in the textbook correctly. From that point on, Cayce gradually transformed into an excellent student. No one could explain how he managed to learn just by sleeping on his books. Later, Cayce shared that the strange event might have been connected to his deceased grandfather. As a child, Cayce had a deeply close bond with his grandfather, who often performed magic tricks for him or took him into the barn to read the Bible and tell stories. But when Cayce was just 4 years old, he witnessed his grandfather fall from a horse and die. Despite this, Cayce later told his parents that he frequently saw his grandfather appear in the barn, continuing to tell him stories. From then on, young Cayce developed a deep love for going alone into the barn or the woods to read the Bible, something his grandfather had inspired. Cayce said that he read the Bible a total of 67 times, and on the 68th time, when he read the passage where Manoah prayed to God for a child, and God granted Samson, he suddenly felt something profound. The Bible continued to say that after God gave Samson, he did not depart, but instead instructed that Samson must be returned to God so he could use his strength to save the Israelites. At that moment, Cayce felt a strong inner calling and began to pray, wishing that he too could help his people. That night, Cayce had a dream. In the dream, a beam of extremely bright light appeared, like a sun hanging at the end of his bed. That light spoke to Cayce, saying, "Your wish. I have heard it. I hope you will stay true to your heart." After that, Cayce woke up, and it was already a new day. Yet Cayce still felt confused, unsure whether he was still dreaming or had returned to reality. Then came the incident where the boy couldn't remember how to spell the word cabin at school. Cayce said it was the first time he realized he could learn incredibly fast through dreams. From a scientific perspective, this may be related to the hippocampus in our brain. Brain scientist Paul MacLean once said that the human brain has 3 layers: the rational brain on the outermost, the emotional brain in the middle, and the instinctual brain in the innermost layer. Although the rational brain seems very important, managing human cognitive functions like logic, language, creativity, and thinking, only 20% of the brain's active neurons are in the rational brain. The remaining 80% reside in the emotional and instinctual brains. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next exciting adventures. Our rational brain can perform 40 logical operations per second, but the instinctive brain doesn't operate at 40 or even 400 times. It processes at an astonishing rate of 11 million times per second. Although it is difficult for us to perceive the speed of the instinctive brain, in fact, dreams are a reflection of its activity. Even when we are asleep, the instinctive brain is silently helping us sort through different files. The instinctive brain has 2 main parts. First, the pineal gland, often referred to as the third eye. Second, the hippocampus, which helps organize our mental files. Therefore, Cayce's ability to absorb knowledge quickly through dreams is not without scientific basis. At the age of 18, Cayce went to the city to earn a living. Soon after, he fell in love with Evans, the daughter of a nobleman in the city. Evans had feelings for Cayce as well. However, in order to marry her, Cayce was forced to find a job with a higher income. So in the year 1900, at the age of 23, Cayce and his father started a travel insurance business. Although the business was challenging, the income was fairly decent. However, just when his career seemed smooth, Cayce suddenly caught the flu, which then developed into severe laryngitis. For many months during that year, he was unable to speak and was nearly mute. The business ultimately failed, so Cayce used his savings to start over and opened a photography studio. This job didn't require much speaking, but during that time, after 10 months of treatment, Cayce still couldn't speak. Then, on March 11, 1901, fate led Cayce to a hypnotist named A.I. Lane. At that time, hypnotherapy was quite popular, so Cayce wanted to give it a try. In the doctor's office, after being hypnotized, just like when he was a child falling asleep on textbooks, Cayce dozed off. In his dream, Cayce suddenly began to speak. "Yes, we can clearly see the body." This cryptic statement startled the doctor. The doctor asked Cayce to find out what part of his body might be unwell. Cayce, speaking in a calm and clear voice, said, "The root of my illness is psychological. You can treat me this way." Then the doctor followed Cayce's instructions, silently signaling his body to direct blood flow to the affected area. Soon after, those around him saw the skin on Cayce's chest and throat turn dark red, and the affected area began to heat up. A little while later, the doctor again followed Cayce's request and signaled the blood circulation to return to normal. When Cayce woke up, he vomited a large amount of blood, and his voice had completely returned to normal. This was the first decoding hypnosis session in Cayce's life, truly a miracle. Because under hypnosis, Cayce appeared to be a completely different person. After waking up, he had no memory of what he had said during the trance and didn't understand any medical knowledge. Later on, Hugo Münsterberg, a psychology professor at Harvard University, suspected that Cayce's story was fake, accusing him of pretending to be mute and being deceitful. However, Münsterberg's mentor, William James, the father of American psychology, leaned toward believing that Cayce was a case of super psychology or a significant example in holistic medicine. After this incident, upon hearing Dr. Lane's account, Cayce began to explore this special ability within himself, but he was very afraid because he wasn't a doctor, yet was providing numerous treatment methods. Cayce worried that this might harm others, so he declined Dr. Lane's offer of cooperation and returned to devote himself to photography. By 1903, his photo studio was flourishing, and after 6 years of hard work, Cayce finally married Evans. At the same time, Cayce continued volunteering at the local library and teaching Sunday school at the church, where he shared knowledge with children. He was truly glad to have escaped the label of spiritual healer. But that peace did not last long. However, peace was short-lived. 3 years later, in the fall of 1906, Dr. Lane returned, this time bringing many other doctors. It turned out he had spread Cayce's story across half of America. The doctors requested Cayce to demonstrate his dream reading abilities. Kind-hearted as he was, Cayce agreed. "We have an entity," he began strangely. He then accurately diagnosed typhoid fever in a medical student present. But the doctors responded arrogantly. They pricked Cayce's hands and feet to test whether he was truly asleep. Upon waking and learning what had happened, Cayce was furious, realizing he had been used as a mere test subject. At the same time, church parents began to denounce him, accusing him of practicing dark arts. The incident soon went public, and Cayce faced immense social pressure and condemnation. Cayce prayed in the chapel, yet he was still condemned for committing the church's most serious charge of heresy. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next exciting adventures. Unfortunately, during that period, Cayce's 2 photography studios burned down one after another. 10 years of effort vanished in an instant. As a result, he had to shoulder a debt of $8,000, equivalent to around $300,000 today. Cayce's life fell into ruin. His entire career and reputation collapsed. Yet at that moment, a doctor named Wesley Harrington Ketchum stepped in to help. At the time, Captain was promoting homeopathy, treating like with like. For example, the poisonous plant belladonna could cause piercing headaches, and homeopathic doctors believed it could also be used to treat similar headache symptoms. Captain could help Cayce clear his name of heresy, but to provide proof of his innocence, Cayce had to demonstrate his dream reading ability once more. Following that, Dr. Ketchum wrote a paper and presented it at a clinical medical conference in Boston. A reporter from the New York Times attending the event was fascinated by Cayce's story and soon featured him on the front page. The Time magazine also picked up the story, but they criticized Cayce as a fraud who knew nothing about medicine. This time, it was too much. Cayce was truly furious. At the same time, tens of thousands of letters poured into Cayce's home. Most came from people who had lost hope in traditional doctors and were willing to pay large sums of money for his help. Until that point, Cayce had never accepted money. Yet after going through so much, one side condemning him as a heretic and the other sending heartfelt pleas, he was torn. Later, according to his third son, after a sleepless night, Cayce finally agreed to resume his dream readings. But the first thing he did was return all the checks and cash enclosed in the envelopes. The readings took place in a private room, under his father's guidance. Cayce would lie on a sofa and fall asleep. Once in the dream state, he would speak the name of the person in the letter, their location, the nature of their problem, and the corresponding solution. A stenographer present would faithfully record everything he said. In this way, Cayce left behind 14,306 recorded prophecies throughout his life, gradually rising from a beginner to a master dream reader, eventually becoming the sleeping prophet who accessed the Akashic Records. Certain events unfolded in Cayce's life like this. In 1911, at the age of 34, he began his first year of dream readings. "It's no use. He can't be saved anymore." When Cayce uttered those words, his wife nearly fainted. The subject of the reading was their newborn second son, who was suffering from a severe case of whooping cough and intestinal inflammation. Cayce tried multiple times to help his son through readings, but in the end, nothing worked. 2 months later, the child passed away. After that, his wife became chronically ill, suffering from pneumonia. Doctors said she only had 1 month left to live. However, Cayce began giving readings for her too, describing many strange remedies and treatment methods. Gradually, her condition improved. In 1912, at the age of 35, Cayce began his second year of dream readings. That week, the winning horse was number 8. After waking, Cayce learned that his father had used the reading to bet on horse racing. Outraged, he severed ties with his father and left town, moving to Selma, Alabama, where he opened a new dream reading office. In 1920, Cayce was 43 years old and began his 9th year of dream readings. The source of his inspiration could now be found in St. Sava. Around this time, an oil tycoon began supporting Cayce's work, since he had helped many soldiers during World War I. Around 1918, he became increasingly committed to the path of dream reading. He recalled the dream from his childhood, the beam of light that had inspired him to stay true to his heart. Cayce believed that his prayer back then was to help his people, just like Samson. So now he needed money. He wanted to open a hospital to help even more people. Finally, after many ups and downs, in 1923, Cayce managed to open a non-profit clinic in Dayton, Ohio. That year, he was 46 and became a full-time trance prophet. In 1925, at the age of 47, Cayce began his 14th year of dream readings at Virginia Beach. His dream reading abilities had recently grown deeper. He revealed many strange insights about astrology, which, surprisingly, were linked to physical health in both this life and past ones. It should be noted that Cayce was a devout Christian, and Christians do not believe in reincarnation. Cayce was extremely fearful of astrology-related content. During this period, this was also the most mysterious part of his prophecies. After entering this esoteric field, Cayce kept repeating Virginia Beach, vague and fragmented phrases like that. What did it really mean? Coincidentally, in 1925, several Wall Street tycoons came to sponsor Cayce. They helped him fulfill his wish of building a real hospital in Virginia Beach. The hospital was beautifully constructed, and even to this day, it is considered a uniquely designed architectural work. Cayce's entire family lived in this hospital. He was like a great father figure, while those in need were cared for there. Around this time, Cayce began to be recognized by the mainstream medical system. Even the 28th President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, one of the first names mentioned in science and technology of the time, along with Edison and composers like Irving Berlin and George Gershwin, all famous figures in society, were among Cayce's clients. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next exciting adventures. In 1929, Cayce was 51 years old and entering his 18th year of dream readings. Less than 6 months later, the stock market crashed and chaos erupted. This prophecy had already been made on April 6, 1929, when Moten Blumenthal, one of the hospital's investors and head of Blumenthal Corporation, a Wall Street tycoon, asked Cayce for advice on the market. Cayce uttered a few prophetic words that later came true with startling accuracy. Although Blumenthal barely survived the financial tsunami, Moren unexpectedly withdrew his investment from Cayce. As a result, not only was the planned institute project halted, but the hospital's operational funds were also depleted. 3 years later, the hospital was forced to shut down. At the age of 55, Cayce once again walked away empty-handed from the dream he had built. Out of necessity, Cayce began traveling the country performing dream readings to raise funds. Yet, this difficult period marked a significant leap in his abilities. In 1935, at a Detroit jail, he was charged with practicing medicine without a license. Although he was released and not fined, Cayce felt deeply ashamed. It was in that very moment of humiliation at age 58 that he first entered the Akashic Records, and thus began a new era in his legendary journey. And so, the story returns to the beginning, where we once mentioned 4 terrifying prophecies. The first major prophecy, the Earth's axis will tilt. At that point, the poles will shift. As a result, regions with cold and subtropical climates will become increasingly subtropical. Plants like mosses and ferns will flourish. These phenomena were predicted to begin occurring sometime between 1958 and 1998. Future generations relied on Cayce's descriptions to draft a map of the major geographical changes. First, the African continent splits into 3 sections along the Great Rift Valley of East Africa, turning into a deep seaway. Israel, Egypt, and the entire eastern Mediterranean coastline vanish. The Arabian Peninsula breaks into 2 isolated islands. On the other side, the Western Sahara region is submerged by the sea, eventually draining into Grand Canyon National Park. Meanwhile, to the west of Africa in the Atlantic Ocean, the legendary continent of Atlantis is foretold to reappear. All of Europe transforms into an archipelago. Portugal narrowly escapes submersion, while Spain becomes a solitary island. France and Switzerland become 2 small islands, one to the north, one to the south. Italy is reduced to its central mountain range. After a massive geographic shift, Germany and Czechoslovakia become isolated islands, while Eastern Europe and Ukraine are submerged. The UK splits into 3 offshore islands, and Scandinavia is replaced by 8 small islands. European Russia turns into a snake-like land strip surrounded by 2 islands. North America suffers greatly. Canada sinks, Greenland expands, and the Great Lakes connect to the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. The east coast of the U.S. and California disappear into the ocean, leaving scattered islands behind. In the northwest of North America, the mythical continent of Lemuria emerges. As Antarctica shifts position, it becomes a habitable zone. In South America, the legendary Lemuria of the giants is predicted to appear. New Zealand transforms into a continent, matching the ancient Zealandia recently rediscovered. In Asia, Indonesia and Malaysia split into 5 separate islands, Japan sinks, and eastern China becomes a swamp. The Himalayas, Hengduan, Tian Shan, Permian Plateau, and Tibetan Plateau become ark-like refuges. Iran, Afghanistan, and the Turkish mountains form another ark. Asian Russia becomes fertile land, the Bering Sea disappears, and the landmass stretches all the way to the Americas. Even Mongolia now has a navy. What do you think about the map changes? The major transformations Edgar Cayce predicted were said to begin sometime between 1958 and 1998. But what about reality? Scientists have indeed observed that since the 21st century, the Earth's magnetic field has been drifting at an increasingly rapid pace. From the 1970s to 1980s, it moved at around 15 kilometers per year. Then suddenly, it accelerated to 55 kilometers per year. Although the shift in the magnetic field and the tilt of the Earth are different phenomena, the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, released a report that sparked concern, because the year this magnetic drift sped up was exactly 1998. And that brings us to the overview of Edgar Cayce's path, from hypnotic trances, dream readings, to miraculous healing, and the first of his 4 terrifying prophecies. One must wonder, how could someone in a dream state, with no medical knowledge, perform feats that even trained professionals couldn't manage when fully conscious? Could the holy light he once saw have been a divine response to a kind-hearted person who wanted to help many others? And the information he left behind about the past universe, the glorious ancient civilizations and their downfall, as well as the future prophecies that could happen to humanity. Could this be a message meant for mankind? Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below the video. That concludes our sharing for today. If you found this video or any of the content on our channel truly helpful, please share it with a friend so they can explore it too. Thank you so much. Goodbye and see you again.